Hare Krishna. So we were discussing verse 5.4. I mean, we have to discuss verse 5.4 today. I'll just share my screen in a minute. Okay, are you all able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Let's recite this verse. You can repeat after me. Sankhya Yoga Prithak Balaha
Sankhya Yoga Pratak Balaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Ekam Apya Astitha Samyag
Ekamapya Astitha Samyak
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam.
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam.
Sankhya Yoga Prithak Balaha
Sankhya Yoga Pratak Balaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Ekam Apya Astitha Samyag
Ekamapya Astitha Samyak
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam.
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam.
Sankhya Yoga Prithak Balaha
Sankhya Yoga Pratak Balaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Ekam Apya Astitha Samyag
Ekamapya Astitha Samyak
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam.
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam.
Anyone else would like to recite?
Sankhya Yoga Pratak Bala
Sankhya Yoga Prithak Balaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Pravadanti na Panditaha
Ekamapya Astitha Samyak
Ekam Apyasthitah Samyag
Ubhayor Vindati Phalam.
Ubhayor Vindate Phalam. Anyone else?
सांख्य योगौ पृथक बाला
Sankhya Yoga Prithak Bala
प्रवदन्ति न पंडिताः
Pravadanti na
Pravadanti na
Panditaha
Panditaha
एकम् अप्य आस्थिता सम्यक्
Ekam
Ekam
Apya
Apyasthitah
Astitha
Samyag
Samyak
उभयोर्विन्दते फलम्
Ubhayor
Ubhayor
Vindate
Vindate
Phalam.
Phalam.
Anyone else? Okay. If not, then let's recite the synonyms. Sankhya,
Sankhya,
सांख्य
analytical study of the material world.
analytical study of the material world.
world
Yoga,
Yoga,
work in devotional service.
work in devotional service.
Prathak,
Pratak,
पृथक
different.
different.
डिफरेंट
Balaha,
Bala,
the less intelligent.
the less
द लेस
intelligent.
इंटेलिजेंट
Pravadanti,
Pravadanti,
प्रवदन्ति
say.
say,
Na,
no,
न
never.
never.
Pandita,
Pandita,
पंडिता
the learned.
the learned.
Ekam,
Ekam,
एकम्
in one.
in one.
इन
Api,
Api,
अपि
even.
even.
इव
Asthita,
Astita,
आस्थित
being situated.
being
being
situated.
situated
Samyak,
Samyak,
सम्यक्
complete.
complete.
complete
Ubhayo,
Ubhayo,
उभय
of both.
of both.
of both
Vindate,
Vindate,
विन्दते
enjoys.
enjoys.
Phalam,
Phalam,
फलं
the result.
the
the
result.
result
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Only the ignorant speak of devotional service, Karma Yoga, as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. Purport. The aim of the analytical study of the material world is to find the soul of existence. The soul of the material world is Vishnu, or the super soul. Devotional service to the Lord entails service to the super soul. One process is to find the root of the tree and the other is to water the root. The real student of Sankhya philosophy finds the root of the material world, Vishnu, and then in perfect knowledge engages himself in the service of the Lord. Therefore, in essence, there is no difference between the two because the aim of both is Vishnu. Those who do not know the ultimate end say that the purposes of Sankhya and Karma Yoga are not the same. But one who is learned knows the unifying aim in these different processes. नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनीति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे. I read the translation one more time. Only the ignorant speak of devotional service, karma yoga, as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. Hare Krishna. So we are discussing the 5th chapter, and the name of the chapter itself is Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. There are 29 verses in the 5th chapter, and it's a pretty interesting section of the Gita, and we'll discuss why. But in one sense, so we have this famous verse, Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam. That's how the 5th chapter ends, where Krishna actually declares that he is actually the enjoyer and the ultimate beneficiary of all the sacrifices, and he is also the he is the master of all the 3 worlds. So before we move ahead, let us first try to understand what is the connection between the chapters 4 and 5, and we'll also see the parallels between chapter 3 and chapter 5. There are a lot of parallels actually in chapters 3 and 5. So if you remember, the 3rd chapter ended with Arjuna asking the question and Krishna answering the question. So Arjuna's question was, Athaken prayuktoyam papam chariti purushah anicham api varshneya balad iva niyojitaha. He asked Krishna that, Krishna, actually, what is it that impels us to do sinful activities? Even though we may not want to do it, still we are, as if we are engaged by force. Baladi api varshneya, balad iva niyojitaha. So Krishna, in one line, he answers Arjuna. He says, Kama esha krodha esha rajoguna samudbhava mahashano mahapapama vidhiyenam iha vairinam. So actually, Kama is lust and Krodha is anger. It is born of Rajoguna. Rajoguna is the mode of passion. And Mahashano, it is all devouring. And Mahapapma is extremely sinful. Vidhi enam iha vairinam. And it is the enemy of the entire world. So actually, this lust, Krishna says, is not an enemy of one person. It is the enemy of the iha vairinam. Here is the enemy, lust. That's how Krishna describes it. And then Krishna also gives the formula to get away from lust, how to conquer lust. So 2 things Krishna says. It's like a 2-course action Krishna tells. So first is, he gives the first is 3.41. He says, Tasmat tam indriyani adav niyamya bharatarshava. Therefore, in the beginning itself, control your senses. So the first thing is, actually control the senses. That is number 1. And then second, Krishna says, this comes in 3.43. Evam buddhe param buddhva samsthabhyanam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kama rupam durasadam. Basically, he says that, knowing yourself transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, basically engage yourself in spiritual intelligence. So in other words, Krishna is saying that first control your senses, second is act spiritually, act dharmically, So that's how the 3rd chapter ended. And the 4th chapter started, actually there are a lot of things that Krishna says in the 4th chapter and the 5th chapter. They are very interesting in one sense. We'll discuss later why. But the 4th chapter, so Krishna had told Arjuna that you act dharmically and control your senses. So Krishna starts the 4th chapter by describing that actually it is Krishna only who gives dharma, who gives jnana. Actually jnana and dharma, they are, they go hand in hand. When we do dharma, we get gyan, and when we get gyan, we do dharma. It is, a synonym in a sense. they go hand in hand. Synergy, as we say, there is a synergy between the two, Jnana and Dharma. So Krishna first said, it's actually me only who give dharma and who give jnana. Imam vivasvate yogam proktavanam. In the beginning itself, I had given this knowledge to the sun god. And then he says, actually, not just I don't just give dharma, I also establish dharma. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. That's how he describes that. Every time when there is a whenever the religious principles they deteriorate, I come myself and then I re-establish dharma. And then he says, not just that, I am also the goal of dharma. Janma karma chame devyam evam yoveti tatpatah tyakpa deham punarjanma naiti mameti swarjuna vitaraga bhay krodha manmaya mam upashta bahavo jnana tapasa put mad bhavam agatah. So he says, and actually I am the goal of the of dharma also. So in the 4th chapter, after speaking thus, of course, he speaks this because Arjuna asks a question. So he takes a little detour. He was talking that, okay, this is the knowledge to control your senses, to control lust. And in between, Arjuna interrupts and asks, how am I supposed to understand that you gave this knowledge? And that's where he speaks all this. And then he comes back on the topic, So he talks about, in the 4th chapter, he talks about the intricacies of what is karma, what is vikarma, and what is akarma. What is to be done and what is not to be done, and what is a transcendental action that doesn't give any material results. And then Krishna also talks about sacrifices. He talks about a variety of different sacrifices, and then he says that actually after doing all these sacrifices, ultimately we get gyan, we get transcendental knowledge. That was the name of the chapter, transcendental knowledge, 4th chapter. Now one thing also that comes there is Krishna also talks about the karma kandis. Karma kand people are those who are after sense enjoyment, who are after material pleasures, but they're doing it dharmically. So they have to do sacrifices. So there Krishna talks about the principle of sacrifice. And then Krishna also talks about a person who is a karma yogi. And Krishna says very clearly that it's not that this karma yogi doesn't do sacrifice. So sacrifice is important to understand. The word sacrifice, it has the same meaning, same root with sacrificial. Sacra means once something that is pure, which becomes, so sacrifice. The idea is that when we do sacrifice, we make it sacred. Whatever activity we do as a sacrifice, it becomes sacred. Sacra is the root. So the karma kandis do sacrifice for material pleasure. And is it that the Gyan yogis, the karma yogis, they don't do sacrifice? No. Krishna says actually for a karma yogi, yagyaye acharayet karma. Krishna says actually for a karma yogi, he does his work itself as a sacrifice. Yeah. So in the 3rd chapter also he had talked about this. Yagyarthat karma netra lokoyam karma bandhani tadartha karma kontaya mukta sangha samacharat. So that same principle Krishna talks about here in the 4th chapter, that the principle of sacrifice applies. But the differentiating factor is that, the karma yogi, he does work as a sacrifice. So that becomes his work. Now, after talking about different kinds of sacrifices, Krishna actually tells that, different sacrifices are born out of different kinds of work, because there are different kinds of people. They are engaged differently in this work. Therefore, different kinds of sacrifices are recommended for them. And, he says that actually, ultimately, the sacrifice results in transcendental knowledge. Shreyan dravya mayad yagyan, jnana yagyaha parantapa, sarvam karma khilam partha, jnane parisampayate. This is 4.33. He says that actually, all sacrifice of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. That's how he describes. And then Krishna tells Arjuna, what is the best way to acquire knowledge? Ultimately, if the fruit of doing sacrifice is to get jnana, is to get knowledge, what is the best way to acquire knowledge? So there he talks about 4.34, tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tatpadarshana. He says that you approach a bona fide spiritual master and then get knowledge from him. But how do you get the knowledge from him? three things Krishna says, which is very important for us to understand. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So three things Krishna says that, pari prashnena, first you have to surrender to him. Then prashnena means inquire, and sevaya means render service. So surrender, service, and inquiry. So these three things are vital for getting knowledge from the spiritual master. Just inquiry won't work, just surrender won't work, and just service also. All three have to be applied. When all these three are applied, then we get transcendental knowledge. Now ultimately we'll talk about how this transcendental knowledge ultimately also results into faith, and then that's how the person actually develops on the path of spirituality. There could be various paths. So now one thing that is important is, we may say that, okay, even a jnana yogi may get jnana here in the same way, but actually that's not true. Acharya has explained that there is like a very there is a difference between the jnani kind of jnana and jnana of either a karma yogi or a bhakti yogi. The difference is in three different parameters. One is, there is an approach to jnana, there is a goal of acquiring jnana, and then there is an effect of getting that jnana. So the effect of getting the jnana from a bhakti or karma yoga perspective that is talked about in 4.35, will come to that. But the approach itself is very different. For the jnana yogis, it is mentioned that they have to do speculative analysis, and then from that they come to the conclusion that's how they are supposed to rise in their knowledge. So their approach is speculative analysis, whereas a person who is either on the path of karma yoga or bhakti yoga, their approach is, as we just discussed, three things: surrender, service, and inquiry, from the spiritual master. Now the goal of that knowledge is very, very different. The goal of Gyan yogi is to merge. So there, when they acquire Gyan, they try to understand that how they are one with the Paramatma, or they are one with Brahman. That's how their idea is. That's their approach. And ultimately they want to merge back into the Brahman, Brahma Jyoti, or Paramatma, whatever you want to call. And whereas in the bhakti path or in the karma yogi path, we try to understand the difference. Krishna is so great, and I am just actually I'm very insignificant in comparison. Therefore, I cannot be Krishna ever. I cannot become Krishna, or I cannot even approach him like that. So let me then render service to Krishna. That's that is the goal of jnana for a bhakti or a karma yogi. Ultimately karma yoga culminates into bhakti yoga. That's described in the 18th chapter later. So, and the effect of the jnana. So effect of the jnana from a jnani perspective, ultimately they want to negate everything. They also want to negate emotions. They say ultimately this world is false, and all the emotions of this world are also false, and therefore they become very hard-hearted. Because they consider that material emotions are not good. They are impediments on the path of jnana. If you get material emotions, you will get trapped in this material world. You will not be able to get out of this material world. So their idea is to give up all emotions. Whereas in the path of bhakti, we try to develop our emotions for Krishna. Put mad bhavam agataha, mad bhavam. Mad bhava is transcendental emotion. So that we try to develop our emotions for Krishna. And when we develop our emotions for Krishna, we also understand that every living entity is a part and parcel of Krishna. Therefore, I should be friendly with everyone. So that is the difference in the effect. So these are three very important differentiating parameters between the gyan of a jnani and the gyan of a bhakta. Now, when Krishna says tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya updekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva darshina. So you go and get this jnana or knowledge from a spiritual master, and then in the 4.35 Krishna talks about what would be the effect of getting this knowledge from a spiritual master? He says, Yagyatva na punarmoham. After Yagyatva, after knowing this, na punarmoham, you will not fall into illusion again. Evam yasyasi pandava. And then he says, Yena bhutani asheshani drakshashyami atmanya athomai. You will understand that all living beings are in me. Ultimately, what Krishna means is that they are my parts, and athomai, they are mine. So that is, so basically we will be able to see the connection of all living entities with Krishna. And in that sense, through our relationship with Krishna, we can see our relationship with other living entities also. So that's how the effect of getting knowledge from a spiritual master is described by Krishna. Now, Krishna after that talks about so what is it that confuses Arjuna? So we know that in the 5th chapter, in the starting itself, Arjuna asked the question again to Krishna, and what is better? Tell me for sure. So there are 2 verses that confuses Arjuna that comes towards the end of the 4th chapter. So first is Krishna talks about 4.39 Shraddhaval labhate jnanam tat parah samyatendriyaha jnanam labhva param shantim achendriya ti gacchati. He says that actually after attaining this transcendent knowledge, you will get param shantim. You will get ultimate, eternal, lasting peace. So shanti. So this word comes again in towards the end of the 4th chapter. So shanti, at one level, it means peace. And how would peace come? First of all, there has to be no violence. That's how peace comes. As we were discussing last time, I mentioned an analogy that suppose if I have a little disharmony with my neighbor, and another neighbor comes to me, and then he said, actually, if you want shanti, then go and fight with your neighbor. So it doesn't work that way. The shanti means, you don't have to do any kind of violence. That's how you get shanti. But Krishna here is talking about internal shanti, inner peace. He's not talking about peace on the battlefield, but Arjuna gets confused with this. And yet, after saying param shantim in 4.42, that is the last verse of the 4th chapter, Krishna talks about again fighting. He says, Tasmat agyana sambhutam ritastham jnanasthit atmanaha chitvainam samshayam yogam atishta bharata. He says, therefore, give up all ignorance and, equipped by this knowledge, armed with yoga, get up and fight. Atishta bharata. Get up and fight. So this call for fighting, again, very unequivocal call for fighting right after Krishna talking about eternal peace, that again confuses Arjuna, and then that's where Arjuna asked that question in the first verse of 5th chapter, Sannyasam karmanam Krishna punar yogam cha shansasi yashreha etayor ekam tanme bruhi sanishchitam. He says actually Krishna talk about sannyasa, you talk about renunciation of work, and yet again you glorify basically you talk about fighting, yet again you glorify renunciation of work. So I'm sorry, renunciation, basically action in renunciation. That's how Arjuna puts it. So please tell me for sure, which one is better for me? Now, if you remember, this is the same, a very similar question that Arjuna had asked even in the 3rd chapter, the first verse, when Krishna had completed the 2nd chapter. 2nd chapter, Srila Prabhupada calls it as contents of the Bhagavad Gita summarized. So in one sense, the whole Bhagavad Gita was spoken by Krishna in the 2nd chapter itself. He had given Arjuna everything that was needed, but Arjuna gets confused. So right in the first verse of the 3rd chapter, he asks, Gyayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana. Excuse me, I'm having a bad throat today. Tat kim karmani ghore mam niyojyasi keshava. He says that why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare when you consider intelligence to be superior to dull matter or fruitive work? That's how Arjuna puts it. Now, one may ask, no, is Arjuna, is he so really so unintelligent? Why is he getting confused again and again? Isn't it very clear that what Krishna is asking Arjuna to do? Very clearly, Krishna is asking Arjuna to fight. So actually, we have to understand that Bhagavad Gita, in a sense, it is Krishna kind of summarizes the entire the knowledge of Vedic scriptures in these 700 verses in the Bhagavad Gita, and he wraps it up so succinctly and so efficiently that he gives the entire essence of the knowledge of the Vedic scriptures in these 700 verses. But there is a very key difference. There is something that is unique about Bhagavad Gita, and that uniqueness is, if you consider in the broad Vedic script canon, if you understand that in the Vedas, very prominently there are two paths that are talked about, two paths for spiritual elevation leading towards transcendence. The first path is the path of karma, where the idea is that, okay, we understand that this place, this world, is a place of enjoyment. As long as I have the blessings of the Supreme Lord, I can enjoy in this world, and ultimately I can go back to the spiritual world also. So that is the path of karma. So the Vedas, they talk about different sacrifices, that if you want to live happily in this world, you perform sacrifices, and by performing sacrifices you will get the things that you want. And gradually also, when you are performing these sacrifices, there is a direct verse that comes in the fourth chapter itself, where Krishna says that actually all these sacrifices are mentioned in the Vedas, and Vedas come from the Supreme Lord. So in that sense, they are purifying. If you follow the word of the scriptures, even though you are enjoying in this material world, there is some gradual spiritual elevation that happens. So that is the path of karma, and that is what is talked about in the Vedas. In the Vedas, we have different fire sacrifices that are mentioned, and the idea is that, okay, if you want this, do this. You want that, you do that. And on the other hand, we have the Upanishads. Now, Upanishads, they're categorically different from the Vedas, in a sense that Upanishads talk about that this place, this world, is a place of misery. This place is a place of attachment. And if you don't want to get miseries, if you don't get attached, just be renounced and try to get detached from this world and renounce this world. That is the Upanishads. Now, there's a part of bhakti also that is talked about, but it doesn't come so prominently in the Vedas and the Upanishad. The bhakti is talked about in the Smriti Shastras. So Vedas and Upanishads are the Shruti Shastras. The Smritis are the Puranas and the Itihasas. That's where the bhakti is very prominently talked about. But what Krishna is telling Arjuna to do, he's not telling Arjuna to do karma kand. He's not telling Arjuna to renounce this world also. He is kind of synthesizing these two parts. He is telling Arjuna that you do renounced action. Now, this is something very unique. This is not very, very prevalent in the Vedic society. We don't find a lot of examples like this, where there are people who are working also in this world, just like an ordinary karmi, yet they are renounced. So we don't find a lot of examples like this in the scriptures. So this is the unique path that Krishna is talking about in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's where Arjuna is repeatedly getting confused. Krishna is talking about renounced action, renunciation in action, not renunciation from action. So renounced action is what is confusing Arjuna. So Krishna is repeatedly telling Arjuna that don't get attached, yet do your duty. Just do your duty as a matter of, just for the sake of doing your duty. Don't get attached to the results. So that's where Arjuna is repeatedly getting confused. Now, when this question had come in the third chapter, when Arjuna had asked, so there also Krishna had talked about both Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. And here also in the fifth chapter, Krishna will talk about Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. But there is a difference. So there, if you remember, Krishna had talked about, he said So Arjuna's question indirectly was that if Karma Yoga if Jnana Yoga is higher than Karma Yoga in the ladder, in the hierarchy, then why are you asking me to not do Jnana Yoga and just do Karma? So that was Arjuna's question in the 3rd chapter. And there, Krishna had said that actually Arjuna, yes, it may be that Jnana Yoga might be higher, sannyas might be higher, but uh, you are not qualified to do Jnana Yoga. He doesn't say it directly, but in a sense, he says that there is a verse that comes in the 3rd chapter, I believe it's 3.6. कर्मेन्द्रियाणि संयम्य य अस्ते मनसा स्मरण इंद्रियार्थान विमूढ़ात्मा मिथ्याचारः स उच्यते. No, he says that actually one who restrains the senses, yet in the mind, his mind is dwelling on the sense objects. He is deluding himself and he is deluding others also. And mithyacharaha sauchyate. He is a pretender renunciate. He is not an actual renunciate. Mithyacharaha sauchyate. So, in other words, Krishna was telling Arjuna that you are not yet qualified to take up Jnana Yoga. Even though you might be controlling the sense, the action senses, but because you are not internally completely purified, your mind might still go towards the sense objects. So that part of qualification comes over there in the 3rd chapter. In the 5th chapter, the differentiating factor is Krishna equates the two. He equates Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. So here, if we consider Krishna, what is he saying? He is saying that only the ignorant speak of devotional service, Karma Yoga, as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. So Krishna is saying that actually both are same only. There is no difference. Why? Because the result of that is same. If you go through Karma Yoga or you go through Jnana Yoga, you will get the same result. It is like, suppose if I want to get a good job, to get a good job, I have to study in the college. I have to take courses so that I can get that good job. Now there are two different courses. One course is easy and one course is difficult. So, and then the teacher comes and I think that, okay, the difficult course is better because it is difficult. But the teacher comes and says that, why are you going for the difficult course? Go for the easy course and you can still get the same job that you will get after completing this course. So he's saying that, so same thing Krishna is also saying. So he'll say later that, both are same in a sense that both lead to the same result, but he says that Karma Yoga is easier than Jnana Yoga. That's how it will come later in the 5th chapter itself. So first he says that only ignorant speak of devotional service or Karma Yoga is different from Jnana Yoga. Sankhya, Jnana Yoga, Karma Sannyas, these are words that Krishna uses interchangeably. All three have the same meaning in one sense. So that's how Krishna is putting here in verse 5.4. So now Prabhupada says, the aim of analytical study of the material world is to find the soul of existence. The soul of the material world is Vishnu. Now this is something, if you understand Vishishta Advaita is the philosophy that was given by Ramanujacharya. So this is the defining metaphor of Vishishta Advaita. So Vishisht Advaita, so there is oneness, but it is a special kind of oneness. It's not oneness in a sense that there is no difference at all between the soul and the super soul. So Vishisht Advaita. So the defining metaphor that Ramanujacharya uses is that there is the body and the soul in one sense. You can't discriminate between the two, body and the soul. When you look at it, you will consider both are same, but there is a difference also. Similarly, so this world is like the body and Narayan is the super soul of this world. That's how Ramanujacharya puts it. So the same analogy Prabhupada is also using. Vishnu is the soul of this universe. So, or Narayan is the soul of this universe. So The real student of Sankhya philosophy finds the root of the material world, Vishnu, and then in perfect knowledge engages himself in the service of the Lord. Therefore, in essence, there is no difference between the two because the aim of both is Vishnu. In one sense, the aim is the same. Those who do not know the ultimate end say that the purpose of Sankhya and Karma Yoga are not the same, but one who is learned knows the unifying aim in these different processes. So I just take a quick pause and see if there are any questions or comments or corrections about what I said so far.
What did you say, Ganpati? It was Vishishtadvaita? What is the difference between Vishishtadvaita and...
No, I just said that this is the defining metaphor of Vishishtadvaita, that just as body and soul, it's very difficult to differentiate between the two. They appear the same, body and soul, but there is a difference also between the two. Similarly, Ramanujacharya explains, when he tries to explain Vishishtadvaita philosophy, he uses the metaphor that Vishnu or Narayan is the soul of the universe. So in one sense they are one, but in one sense they are different. So we understand that the body cannot function without the soul, and similarly the universe cannot function without Narayan. That is the defining metaphor of Vishishtadvaita philosophy.
But the body and the soul are not the
Are
same.
different.
No,
Exactly.
same as the universe and Narayan are not the
Yeah,
same.
but from a plain eye, you can't differentiate. Can you tell me where is my soul here? You can't. You can tell me you are the soul. You can tell me like that. But you means for me, it may mean body, it may mean my eye, it may mean my nose. So we can't really see the soul. So we can't easily differentiate, but we understand that there is a soul, and it is because of the soul that the body is working, or it is walking, talking, seeing, hearing. So in the same sense, so soul becomes the real essence of our existence. It is an intangible essence of our existence. Similarly, he uses that same metaphor to describe that Narayan is the intangible in sense we can't see Narayan and we can't see Vishnu, but he is there. Without him, this world,
but
this
nothing
universe cannot
functions
function.
without him. Okay. But it's not similar to Achintya Veda Tattva.
No,
I think.
no, that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But although we say that we are Brahma Madhav Gaudiya Sampradaya, but if you see the Achintya Bhedabhed philosophy is more similar to Vishishta Advaita than the philosophy of the Dvaita philosophy of Madhvacharya. So because Madhvacharya talks about Pancham Bhed, what sameness? Everything is different. The Jeev is different from the Prakriti is different from the Ishvara is different from the Jiva. So he talks about Pancham Bhed. There is no oneness. He says that everything is different. Every living entity, one living entity is different from another living entity.
They have all have their own individuality.
Right. So what Madhvacharya did is he placed himself exactly opposite to Advaita of the Shankara's Advaita philosophy. He completely smashed the philosophy of so Dvaita and Advaita. So both are the names are also different, and they called themselves Mayavadis. So Madhvacharya called himself Tattvavadis. So Maya means no substance, and Tattva means substance. So actually, Madhvacharya placed himself exactly opposite to the philosophy of Advaita or the philosophy of Shankaracharya. So when what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did is he reconciled the two. Right? Okay, there is a Bheda and there is Abheda also. So it is Achintya Bheda Bhed. So that's how he put himself. So our philosophy, Achintya Bheda Bhed, is more closer to Vishishta Advaita than to Madhva's Dvaita philosophy. Although we classify ourselves in the Dvaita philosophy because the focus is on bhakti, and that was the focus of Madhvacharya also. That ultimately we are meant to serve Vishnu, serve Krishna. Obviously, even Ramanujacharya said the same thing, that we are meant to serve Narayan. That is our ultimate goal of the human existence.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions or corrections or comments about what I said today? Any other realizations? Okay, if not, let's move on to the next verse. Share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let's recite this verse just once and then we'll go to translation and perfect. Yat sankhyaye prapyate sthanam
Yat sankhyaye prapyate sthanam
tad yogair api gamyate
tad yogairapi gamyate
ekam sankyam cha yogam cha
ekam sankyam cha yogam cha
yah pashyati sa pashyati.
yapashyati sapashyati.
Translation: one who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are. Purport: the real purpose of philosophical research is to find the ultimate goal of life. Since the ultimate goal of life is self-realization, there is no difference between the conclusions reached by the two processes. By Sankhya philosophical research, one comes to the conclusion that a living entity is not a part and parcel of the material world, but of the supreme spirit whole. Consequently, the spirit soul has nothing to do with the material world. His actions must be in some relation with the supreme. When he acts in Krishna consciousness, he is actually in his constitutional position. In the first process, Sankhya, one has to become detached from matter. And in the devotional yoga process, one has to attach himself to the work of Krishna consciousness. Factually, both processes are the same, although superficially one process appears to involve detachment and the other process appears to involve attachment. Detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same. One who can see this sees things as they are. So again, it's very Prabhupada is putting this in very, very simple words. So Prabhupada is saying that actually the one process focuses on getting detached from the material world. So ultimately, when we get detached from the material world, the idea is to get liberated, get away from the material world. The other process focuses on attaching ourselves to Krishna or to the supreme reality. Maya sakta manaha partha. That's how Krishna puts it. So make your mind attached to me. So become attached to me. That's how Krishna puts it. So that is tasyaham sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yoginam. So that is an easier process, although they, uh, the goal is kind of same. The goal is that we have to become detached from the matter, and Krishna also says in the 18th chapter, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na shochati na kangshati samaha sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. Now, after one reaches the Brahman realization means self-realization. Once one who has perfected the path of self-realization and attained the Brahma Bhuta platform, then he understands Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param. And on the other hand, so they are indirectly going towards Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param. And the Bhakti yogis, they understand it from beginning itself that ultimately the goal is to serve Krishna and the goal is to become attached to Krishna. And they work directly for achieving that goal rather than first getting detached from the material world, then understanding, oh, there is a supreme person to whom we are meant to render service, and then getting attached to that person. That's a little longer process, although in one sense the result would be the same. So that's how Prabhupada is putting it in simple words. So in one sense, this word is also uh, kind of conveying the same meaning that was put across by Krishna in the previous verse, but in a more in stronger words. So he's trying to put across this point to us. One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are. Yaha pashyati sa pashyati. One who sees this, he actually sees. And who doesn't see like this, he doesn't see. So of course we may ask this question that, okay, then why do we talk so much about Mayavad and all? So we have discussed this previously, that Mayavad philosophy is different from impersonalism in a sense that the Mayavad philosophy, it considers the form of Krishna to be a product of Maya, which is an offense to Krishna. So impersonalism, however, is not exactly Mayavad. So there are impersonalists who are not Mayavadis. Even in the scriptures it is mentioned. So we have the examples of the four Kumaras who were impersonalists earlier but later became personalists. Then Shukdev Goswami himself was an impersonalist, but he later became a personalist. They were not Mayavadis, they were impersonalists. So, and so
What
there
is
is
the
no,
difference? Sorry, what is the difference?
the difference is that Mayavad philosophy considers the form of Krishna to be a product of Maya. So their idea is that when the avatar then that comes to this material world, that is actually, when the Nirvishesh Nirakar Brahman, when it comes in the contact of material mode of goodness, in the mode of the Sattva Guna, then it takes a form, it comes down as an avatar. But when the avatar finishes its business, because it is impure in a sense that it has an impurity of the material mode of goodness, ultimately the avatar also goes back and merges back into Brahman.
But who do you consider as impersonals and who do you consider as Mayavadis? That's what's confusing.
Mayavadis are the people who have this philosophy that Krishna's form
But
is
is that
material.
Shankaracharya? I mean,
Yeah,
what's
exactly. So that's a difference. If you look at Shankaracharya's commentary, he actually is very clear in his philosophy. He does talk about the oneness of the soul and the Brahman, but there is in his I'm missing for which I think 2.13 or one of the verses he talks about that Narayan is para. Narayan is transcendental. He is untouched. He is beyond this material world. He says it very clearly. But the modern Mayavadis, they basically they don't talk about that. They
so
consider,
you're saying they've distorted Shankaracharya's
yeah,
philosophy
right,
a little bit, and that's who
exactly,
you're calling Mayavadis.
exactly.
But real impersonalism, you're saying, as Shankaracharya propounded it,
So,
is more like
right. I mean, also Shankaracharya also made it a little complex. He didn't
he
very
did. Yeah, it could be confusing one way or the other. Yeah.
right. So, I mean, he does talk about that Narayan is para. He's transcendental. He's untouched by the material nature, but he doesn't make it very clear in a way. So,
Mhm.
like if you look at the other acharyas, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, they have made it very, very clear. There is no doubt about it. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made it very, very clear that
But then, how
Krishna.
were four Kumaras impersonalists?
So basically, if you read the Bhagavatam itself, so Bhagavatam in the fourth canto, it is mentioned that the Kumaras, they were fixed in the Brahman consciousness. They were fixed in the on their they were in the samadhi, say in the sense that their mind was always fixed in Brahman. But they have heard about Vishnu. They have heard that okay, there is a form of transcendence who is Vishnu or Narayan, and they think that okay, let us first go and see what this form is about, what Narayan is about. They haven't yet had darshan of Lord Narayan. So they are, because they are perfected sages, they are self-realized, they are able to rise to Vaikuntha. They go to Vaikuntha, and when they are going to it, so there are 7 doors. We know Jai Vijay stops them
But
because they
how
are.
can they, if they were transcendentalists meditating on Brahman, how could they have the capacity to see Vishnu?
So by the dint of their austerities, they were able to go to. That's how it is explained in the Bhagavatam itself. If you read Bhagavatam Mataji.
Mhm.
So by the dint of their austerities, by the dint of their tapasya, they were able to go to the Vaikuntha, where Lord Narayan lives, and that's where the Jai Vijay stops them, and then they curse Jai Vijay. So and then when they curse, after that there is a commotion, and Lord Narayan comes out, after hearing this, that this is what is happening. And Lord Narayan, when this, even before they see Lord Narayan, the smell of the tulsi leaves from the feet of Narayan, it enters their nostrils, and it is described in the Bhagavatam for the first time. They become disturbed. Their minds become disturbed from their samadhi on Brahman. So their samadhi stage is gone after that. Kind of. That's how Bhagavatam puts it. And when they
Yeah,
see,
I know the story, I understand the story, but I just don't understand how they could have been Brahman concentrated and get the opportunity to see Vishnu. That's the part that I mean. I know the whole Bhagavatam story, but I think I'm trying
yeah.
to get an explanation of.
So if they're impersonalists, how could they go to
Yeah, how
Vaikuntha?
could they even have the opportunity to,
Yeah.
like we so many times we studied that the impersonalists do not even have a chance to see the Lord, in
Yeah.
his form, because they are almost averse to the form of the Lord,
Right. So that's the thing. So if you
but maybe the four Kumaras were not averse, they were just
right,
exploring,
exactly.
perhaps. Yeah.
They were not averse to the form of the Lord. They were so attracted to the impersonal form of the Lord, to impersonal Brahman, that they only endeavored to. So that is, Prabhupada also explains that the default spiritual understanding is Brahman understanding, default. If you don't get in touch with any devotees, if you don't get in touch with any acharya, that is that default understanding, and you naturally gravitate towards that Brahman realization.
Mhm.
So
And recently I read even Bilva Mangal Thakur was an impersonalist who became a personalist. So I don't know exactly what he was before he became a devotee. I only know the devotee story, but I read that he was an impersonalist.
Biswaganga Thakur is the one who took out
Right,
his
the
eyes, right?
eyes, yeah, the blind, yeah.
Well, he got attached to a
Right, but
prostitute.
recently I read somewhere authentically that he was an impersonalist. I don't remember where I read it, in some translation or some place,
Okay,
that he was an impersonalist before he became a personalist.
could be Mataji. It is possible. So one thing that we see in the scriptures and even in our Gaudiya tradition is that we have seen impersonalists become personalists, but we don't see so much a personalist becoming an impersonalist. Of course, there is
Right.
one or two examples like Madhusudan Chakravarti and others, but mostly we have seen the other way, impersonalists becoming personalists.
Personalist, yes.
Even in the scriptures, we have the story of four Kumaras, even the story of Shukadev Goswami himself. So, it is explained that the personality of God is so attractive, and that even when the impersonalists, although they are fixed in their Brahman consciousness, they are fixed in their samadhi, but they get disturbed, and then they hanker to associate with the Lord. He's so attractive. The personality is so attractive. So, any other questions, comments, realizations? Okay, so if not, then I was just talking about that this is a pretty interesting section of the Gita, in a sense that when Krishna talks about yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. So he's talking about the concept of avatar, that I come myself, whenever there is whenever the religious principles are decaying and adharma becomes prominent, then I come myself. So this concept of avatar is a unique revelation of the Vedic theology. We understand that in other religious traditions, they don't have this concept. Christians, they have the concept that, okay, God doesn't come himself. He sends his only son, So their idea is that this whole universe it is of no consequence. And the only the flora and fauna of this universe was created by God to send his only son to this world, so that people who accept Jesus as the savior, they will return back to the spiritual world, and they will live there eternally if they accept Jesus. And if they don't accept, they will eternally live in hell. So that is the idea of
I know,
the
such a narrow concept, huh?
right, exactly. And the Islam, that is the another second most prominent religion today in the world, although it is on the path to becoming the most prominent religion. They have the idea that this world is so filthy, it is so bad, that there is absolutely no contact between Allah and this world. This world is extremely filthy, so there cannot be any contact. The only contact of Allah with this world is the word of Quran. That is the revelation that was given by Allah through the only prophet, that is Prophet Muhammad. So they think that, okay, God is completely transcendental, so they cannot even conceive the idea of avatar. And that's how we understand that they also At times they will break the temples, they will do all sorts of nasty things with the deities and the temples. So whereas we understand our Vedic philosophy explains that actually it talks about uh, the God is so merciful, that he himself comes to this world. So although God has a transcendental aspect, he is transcendental, he is also immanent. Immanence is opposite of transcendence. Transcendence means completely out, and immanence means one who is within this world also. So he is in this world in a subtle form. Although we cannot see him, but he is maintaining this world. He is actually the driving factor of this world. Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matsthani sarva bhutani na chaham teshu avasthita na cha matsthani bhutani pashyame yogameshwaram bhuta brahna na cha bhutastho mamatman bhuta bhavana. He says that I am actually Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina. In my unmanifest form, I pervade the whole material world. Matsthani sarva bhutani. So Matsthani, all living beings are situated in me. That is Paramatma. Before that, he had talked about Brahman, and Matsthani sarva bhutani is Paramatma. But I am not in them. So that is Bhagwan. So Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matsthani sarva bhutani na chaham teshu avasthita. Na chaham teshu avasthita talks about Bhagwan. So in this one verse, Krishna talks about all three aspects of the transcendence: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. So, of course, in the fourth chapter, the concept of avatar is very, very clear. So that is one of the key differentiating factor of the Vedic theology with other different religious traditions of the world. So, of course, then this understanding continues in the fourth chapter, then fifth chapter, and then the focus on this comes in the ninth and 10th chapter, where Krishna gives the Raj Vidya. The Raj Vidya section will come later in the ninth chapter. Raj Vidya Rajaguhyam Pavitramidam Uttamam Pratyakshaavagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avyayam. So with that, I'll just take a last pause and see if someone would like to add something or correct me or share any realizations. Okay, if not, then we can stop here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhyabhya eva cha पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। श्रीमद् भगवत गीता की जय। श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। हरे कृष्ण।
Ganapati Govind Prabhu ki jai.
Hi. Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, everyone.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you for joining. It's a third chapter, 14th verse today.
Yeah, Prabhuji, 1 minute.
Yeah.
One more minute.
Sure, take your 10 minutes.
My
Hare
file
Krishna Mataji.
3.15, right, Prabhuji?
3.14 Mataji.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
14. I can do this week.
Prabhuji, if you want, I can do Prabhuji.
Yes, Mataji. I was actually waiting for that.
Yeah, sorry, I joined 1 minute late.
No
Yeah.
problem. You want me to go ahead?
Yes, Prabhuji. Go ahead, Prabhuji.
Okay, sure, Mataji. 3:14, third chapter, 14th verse. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhava. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhavaha. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhavaha. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhavaha. All living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains, produced from rain. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Harni Mataji, you want to go next, Mataji?
Sure, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Annad bhavanti bhutani prajanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavati prajanyo yajnah karma samudbhavaha. Annad bhavanti bhutani prajanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavati prajanyo यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नाद् भवन्ति भूतानि प्रजन्याद् अन्न संभवः यज्ञाद् भवति प्रजन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नाद् भवन्ति भूतानि प्रजन्याद् अन्न संभवः यज्ञाद् भवति प्रजन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नाद् भवन्ति भूतानि प्रजन्याद् अन्न संभवः यज्ञाद् भवति प्रजन्यो यज्ञः karma samudbhavaha. All living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rain. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Radhika Mataji, you want to go next, Mataji?
Yes, Mataji. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyat anna sambhava yajnat bhavati parjanyo jnana karma samubhava. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyat anna sambhava yajnat bhavati parjanyo jnana karma samubhava. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyat anna sambhava yajnat bhavati parjanyo yajnas karma subhava. All living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, and yajna is born of prescribed duty.
Hare Krishna, Radhika. Okay, I'm going to go next. अन्नात् भवति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवः यज्ञात् भवति प्रज्ञा पर्जन्यो यज्ञाः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नात् भवन्ति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवः यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नात् भवति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवः यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नात् भवति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवः यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः अन्नात् भवति भूतानि पर्जन्यात् अन्न संभवः यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः All living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. Hare Krishna.
Mataji, can I read?
Yeah, go ahead, Mataji.
अन्नात् भवन्ति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवा यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञकर्म समुद्भवा अन्नात् भवन्ति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवा यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञकर्म समुद्भवा अन्नात् भवन्ति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्न सम्भवा यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञकर्म समुद्भवा All living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rain. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties.
Hare Krishna. Chaitanya
Yes.
Prabhu? Yeah.
Yes.
You want to go next, Prabhuji?
Yes, I would love to.
It's 3.14, Prabhuji.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Annat bhavanti bhutani